rights, which is a core issue when it comes to extractive industries in Africa. I have also together with me Anton. Anton, I will introduce him, but he's an expert in business and human rights. He's based in Belgium with long experience of working in this sector in Great Lakes, in Iraq, and other parts of the world where the issue of voluntary principle has been key tool to drive regions and countries out of conflict and also mitigate some of the key challenges. I have also with me John DRIMMER. John DRIMMER, he is the owner, so to say, of the voluntary principles. He's from the Secretariat of the voluntary principles. He have to work up early in the morning as he's based in New York to be with us today. So this event today is aimed at discussing, raising public awareness of the voluntary principle. Look at the voluntary principles as a key advocacy tool that can facilitate inclusive governance in approaching what is happening in northern Mozambique, aimed at mitigating some of the conflicts, some of the issues, and also how extractive industry in that area can take place, respecting human rights, with businesses applying in their relationship with government, in their relationship with the army, respect human rights, but particularly address, engage, and allow communities to have a substantial participation so that communities, they can feel part of that process, and that we see as a way of mitigating some of the key issues, of the key governance and grievances that are underpinning what is happening there. Without further ado, I will invite Colonel OMAR SARANGA as representative of the government of Mozambique, particularly of the Defense Ministry, to give his keynote address. Over to you, Colonel OMAR SARANGA.
So, hello everyone. So, thank you very much. But I will deliver my speech in Portuguese.
Mostra ele então, mostra ele.
Interpretation will be needed. So, may I hear on?
Please, we have simultaneous interpretation.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Excelências, minhas senhoras, meus senhores.
Jovens.
Em nome de Sua Excelência.
Venham para aqui ajudar-me. Eu quero o computador aqui à minha frente. Pode ser? Não tem vídeo, né?
Não tem vídeo.
Por favor. Pode prosseguir, por favor. Pode prosseguir.
Ok.
E eu, como... Por essas considerações, sim, agradecemos agradecemos a parceria com o Ministério do... Oh. Sim, ponha-me... Muito obrigado. Eu estou mute. Nice.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
You are very good. You are excellent, Colonel. Really, really clear. Thank you for your encouragement. Process. Very good process. Thank you. Really learned a lot. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Coronel Saranga, por estas considerações. Sim, estamos... Sim, e vamos prosseguir. We will proceed. Without further ado, I will call our first speaker today. Is Anton Bonnici. Is EU expert on business and human rights, to give an overview of the voluntary principles for business and human rights. Over to you, Anton. Vamos passar hoje. Acho que não estou a mostrar ele.
Todos não tem imagem.
Não tem vídeo. Anton, put video, please. Anton, video, please. Video, please. Your video, please.
I cannot hear you because it says that you are the host and you need to stop it. You have stopped the video, so you need to unstop it.
Yeah, that's it. We have to unstop his video. No, we stop this video. Mas o Sérgio, o que se passa com o Sérgio hoje?
Second Bill Clinton administration. The Secretary of State was Madeleine Albright, and at the end of her tenure as Secretary of State, Mrs. Albright convened the government of the United States and of the United Kingdom together with a small group of companies and NGOs. The NGOs were, I'm being told I can try and put the video on. No, it does not allow me. I have tried. The NGOs were Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, with the observation capability of the International Committee of the Red Cross. The companies where BP and Shell, in its IFC standards, have developed also performance standard number 4, very much on the basis of the voluntary principles, and therefore allowing public scrutiny, monitoring of how companies are working with regards to communities, and whether when they protect people from the activity of the developments of both mining or oil and gas, protect communities. It's important that communities are at the center of the developments, that the center is people. People need to benefit from developments, from investments. And that's why we call it human rights. And therefore, private security has an important role, but people who participate in private security sometimes need screening, need training, need to know what the standards are. And this also, as Colonel OMAR SARANGA was saying, is the standard of the Mozambican military, that people are trained to the highest standard with regards to the concepts relating to human rights. People are trained to know what these are and to then apply them on the ground. So I do not wish to say much more, except that this is a process of dialogue, and no one gets to perfection from day one, but one has to start with a step. And what my commitment is, together with Professor Adriano, and now I will lead to John DRIMMER, is to be able to work with Colonel Omar and any civil society organization to build the basis for dialogue. And then eventually you can invite also companies to join this dialogue, but you need to own the dialogue first between civil society and the government, particularly the Ministry of Defense. And then companies can be invited and can respectfully be full participants and work with you to adhere to this very important international standard. But you need to lay the basis of accountability so you can monitor in future the activity from the development to the production of the resources that God has blessed Mozambique with. So, Jonathan, I will pass on to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton and Adriano and everybody for having me. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about both the voluntary principles themselves and the voluntary principles initiative. So the voluntary principles and the voluntary principles initiative are two separate things. And so as Anton mentioned, the voluntary principles and the initiative were created about 20 years ago, helping companies and governments come together to solve security and human rights approaches associated with conflicts, Nigeria, Colombia, Indonesia, and in the Clinton administration, these issues which were connected to companies were identified as areas where a multilateral, multi-stakeholder approach could help come up with solutions in terms of perceived governance gaps. And so the initiative was created with leading NGOs, leading governments, leading extractive companies to establish good practice in the areas of conflict where governance could use some strengthening. So the principles themselves have three components to them. The first is risk assessment, the second is public security, and the third is private security. And the principles for risk assessment, there are 6 different parts to it: identifying risks with political, economic, civil, or social factors, a potential for violence, the human rights records of relevant security forces, the local prosecuting authority to ensure accountability, the rule of law, conflict analysis with root causes, and then finally the risks associated with transfers of lethal and non-lethal equipment. For public security, for private security, they talk about the importance of community consultations about security arrangements, the investigation, of security abuses, the type of force that can be applied, making sure it's proportionate to the threat, including the voluntary principles in trainings and things along those lines. And as part of the Secretariat team, it is part of our job to help explain what these different principles mean, how they apply, who they can most effectively be applied to, and in what circumstances. So today, the Voluntary Principles Initiative, which is different again from the principles themselves, anybody can apply the principles, but the initiative is composed of about 50 different members around the world. There are 3 different pillars, maybe about 60 now, 60 members. There are 3 pillars, and then there are a set of observers. So the pillars are the government pillar, which includes the US, the UK, Switzerland, Canada, Netherlands, Australia, Ghana, and others. Civil society, NGOs like Human Rights Watch, International Alert, Fund for Peace, UNICEF Canada, and others. Leading companies, Exxon, Chevron, Total, Eni, Rio Tinto, Glencore, BP, Shell, other oil, gas, and mining companies. And now we are starting to have natural resource companies outside of oil, gas, and mining that are joining, palm oil, for instance. And then there are observers like the Red Cross, the IFC, the OECD, and others. And part of the value of membership, and as a Secretariat, what we really try to promote is both high level and granular engagement among the members, among the observers, around the very most challenging security and human rights issues. And these can be anything from riots to illegal minors, to dealing with children or women or national minorities and vulnerable populations. It can be operating in conflict zones. It can be how technology is ultimately changing security practice. And so engagement, which is a real key, again, aspect of participation in the VPI, the membership group of the Voluntary Principles, really focuses on sharing good and best practices and strategies for confronting them. Another significant aspect of the initiative, again, a little bit different than the principles, focuses on implementation. And this works both with members of the initiative and outside of members of the initiative. And implementation takes a couple of different forms. One is working groups in a number of countries where there are local on-the-ground challenges. These are called implementation working groups. And this is one of the key future aspects of the VPs, continued growth of implementation working groups. It's something that we established a few years ago as a priority, and we are carrying out today. And so whether it's Peru or Ghana or Nigeria or Myanmar, we are bringing together government and companies that operate in the area, civil society, community representatives, academicians, people from academia, and others to talk about confronting local challenges on the ground. Another part of implementation that the Secretariat and the VPI, the initiative, put out has to do with tools and toolkits. And that can be anything from model trainings to model contract provisions that companies and governments, companies and private security providers can put into their memoranda of understanding and their agreements. There are checklists and guidances for children and vulnerable population. There's an auditing guidance on auditing implementation of the VPs. There are also a number of webinars, regular webinars that are being put out, some of which are only for initiative members and some of which are available more widely to anybody interested in security and human rights issues. Another part of what the initiative is working on and what the Secretariat is working on is partnering with a range of organizations to help share learnings and develop best practices, ultimately with an eye towards preventing security and human rights abuses. So some of the thought leadership and tools occurs solely within the initiative, and some of it takes place with entities outside the initiative. And this is often done through working groups. And so, for instance, We had a working group on model contract clauses. Right now, there's a working group that I'm helping facilitate on threat assessments in conflict-affected areas. So different working groups that, again, are led by the initiative and the Secretariat, but they involve individuals and entities outside of the initiative, again, to help develop best practice. And then I guess the final point that I'll mention is where the initiative is going. We are increasing our membership with governments, with companies, with civil society. Again, looking not just at extractive companies, but natural resource companies, and then other sectors outside of oil, gas, mining, natural resources that have similar security challenges where human rights risks may be present. We are thinking about additional implementation working groups in additional countries. Again, that is a priority item for the VPs. We're also thinking about how the VPs can work more effectively with supply chains around security and human rights. And a lot of thought right now is going into work on tools and thought leadership regarding conflict assessments, threat assessments in conflict zones, working in conflict-affected areas, and other issues related to conflict. So I will stop there and hand it back over to Adriano, but happy to take questions on behalf of the Secretariat, on behalf of the VPs and the VPs initiative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan DRIMMER, from the Secretariat of the voluntary principles, for those remarks, opening remarks, giving the perspective of how the principles came about, and how that has evolved, the pillars, and the issue of how Mozambique could tap into this existing platform as an attempt to address what is happening in northern Cabo Delgado. So you talk to us about what the principles are and what they are not, what they can do and what they cannot do. And this speaks very much to what Anton had said earlier. Some people have said that in the context of what is happening in northern Cabo Delgado, this comes a little bit late, considering the already social disintegration in that area. Social disintegration. We have more than 300,000 IDPs that are now moving into out the province, now reaching out to other provinces, Nampula and Niassa, also Zambezia. And we have also a number of more than 1,500 people that lost their lives, and this it affects social trust. It affects social trust in Cabo Delgado. The voluntary principles are an important entry point. My question to you, and also reading some of the questions here in my chat box, my question to you is how could we as country, as civil society organizations, as international community here that is participating in this webinar, and how the international oil companies and the business community, so to say, which is way much larger than the international oil companies, how could we show goodwill and work together alongside the voluntary principles? Do you see, and also taking into account what the Colonel Omar Saranga had said, taking into account what he has said. He has clearly said that their participation in this process, it shows goodwill. Number two, in terms of way forward, they would like to not only be part of this, but also that the human rights issues and reports being issued, they could benefit of their input, of their participation. So do you see, considering all this, being the Secretariat of the voluntary principles, do you see, how do you see this being an opportunity for Mozambique? Over to you, Jonathan Drimmer.
Sure, thank you. So I do think the voluntary principles and the voluntary principles initiative, both were really created for situations like we are seeing in Mozambique, where we do have reported conflicts in different parts of the country, where we have a number of major multinational businesses operating, where the idea of bringing together leading global thinkers on security and human rights, again, to assist on a fairly narrow piece of what we're seeing, which is the protection of human rights. We have, again, people who have been thinking about and dealing with these issues from public and private security and the company side for many, many years. And so when we think about where the Voluntary Principles Initiative and the VPs themselves can make the most difference, it is in places where we are seeing conflict. And so the concept, I think, of engagement between government and companies and civil society in Mozambique with leading international security and human rights thinkers, applying their experience, applying the tools that have been developed based on confronting similar challenges for many, many years, it really poses, in my view, the perfect opportunity for engagement. And again, I want to make sure to emphasize that the VPs and the VPs initiative does have a very narrow mandate. It doesn't get involved in politics. It doesn't get involved in security strategy. It doesn't get involved in other areas outside of the narrow mandate of how to protect human rights. Now, it's true that human rights issues can arise in different situations. They can be caused by social conflict, they can be caused by environmental challenges, sometimes economic factors will contribute to tensions that lead to human rights violations. But really the VPs and the VP initiative focuses really quite directly on the interface, the interaction between companies and security forces and local communities, and how to avoid negative human rights impacts within those interactions. So again, as we look at the situation that's being reported coming out of Mozambique, looking at the local implementation working groups that already exist in other countries, seeing how the VPs and the VP initiative has been applied in similar settings. Again, a targeted focus on helping protect and respect human rights is really what the VP is about. If that answers your question.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much, Jonathan. You are clear. You are clear. There is a big opportunity here. We are starting. We did not start well. The issues I have alluded to, they clearly amount to not a good beginning. But Rovuma is the game changer for the country. As I'm speaking, Rovuma has received the biggest ever investment in energy project in the African continent. This is a call for immediate action. This is a call for immediate action. And the voluntary principles are an important opportunity for that. We have Colonel OMAR SARANGA here, who is the representative of the Ministry of Defense, the ministry in charge of the situation in northern Mozambique. And the voluntary principles, they prevent, they reject, and repair human rights violations. This is how we look at it. This is how we here at CDD we look at it. And we look at it as an opportunity for a collective action by the international community, by the international business community, domestic business community, the host government Mozambique, with communities. It is not only about huge walls to protect your investments in northern Mozambique. No, it is not about huge walls, big tanks, and all kind of AK-47 to protect your investment. It's working with communities. It's respecting human rights. It is socioeconomic investments for the people there to participate meaningfully and also benefit and also harness that. And what we are starting today, it is really an important beginning of that process. I will invite Coronel Saranga. Acompanhou muito bem a questão, as apresentações feitas do que são os princípios voluntários para negócios e direitos humanos. Acompanhamos atentamente a sua intervenção, concordamos com ela. O que é que nos diz em termos de caminhos para frente? Estão criadas as condições para trabalharmos juntos, como governo,
nós não estamos
como
a ouvir
defesa.
O que está a dizer em português.
Diga? Quem está falando?
Hello?
Hello?
We are not getting any word from the interpreters. We are
Okay.
not understanding because we are not hearing him
Janato?
properly.
Janato? Janato? Alô, Janato? Alô, Janato? Alô, Janato? What's happening, Janato?
Bom, nós não estamos a ouvir nada de coisa sobre o que o tradutor diz.
Mas ele está a traduzir. Yeah.
Mas não soube absolutamente nada desse lado. Estamos a ouvir apenas ruídos só.
Ok, vamos melhorar. Então, Coronel Saranga.
Em termos de coisa, o que falou em inglês, nós não chegamos a acompanhar aqui, ou não acompanhei devidamente o que falou em inglês.
Ok. Mas a minha questão para si, Coronel, o que as apresentações fizeram, nos apresentaram a origem dos princípios voluntários, seus objetivos, seu enfoque, que é consistente com o que o Coronel esteve a dizer. E eu dizia o seguinte, considerando que Cabo Delgado, neste momento, representa aquele quadro que conhecemos, de vulnerabilidade, de deslocados, de refugiados, daquele número de mortes e, claramente, o nível de confiança social bastante reduzido, tendo em conta toda esta situação. O que eu pergunto ao Coronel Saranga é o seguinte. Estamos prontos, Coronel, para utilizar esta situação toda que estamos a estabelecer hoje dos princípios voluntários e caminharmos para rejeitarmos violação de direitos humanos, para repararmos violação de direitos humanos e promovermos participação da comunidade. Podemos, Coronel, dizer que sim, vamos trabalhar nesse sentido a partir de hoje.
Bom, mais uma vez, deixa eu interferir. Nós aqui deste lado não estamos a ouvir nada, absolutamente nada mesmo, né? Há qualquer coisa que não está bem, né? Portanto, agora neste caso, agora nem português nem inglês conseguimos ouvir. Alô?
Sim, não viu o que eu falei?
Não, é que deste lado, bom, como a sua imagem, estamos a vê-lo a falar, a gesticular, mas não estamos a ouvir o que é que está a dizer mesmo em português. Agora até ouvi essa imagem em inglês, agora o de português nem estávamos a ouvir nada. Mesmo agora está a falar em inglês. Não, há cortes constantes e frequentes. Alô?
Alô?
Yes. Colonel Saranga, do not worry. We are following. This is the first time we're having this conversation. We will have on the future, the next session. I'm sure things will work much smoother. But this has been a very good experience in terms of having your leadership to start convening this first discussion. You and Professor Novunga together are very well positioned to bring civil society to first think about how to take this. No country put the voluntary principles in perfection on day one. No one has done this to perfection. It's all a journey, and we can work together. You can access the expertise that is available. The Secretariat, led by Jonathan, I will support as you require. But this is a very good initial conversation. So do not worry about today's translation. This has been a very good experience. Thank you, Colonel.
Anyway, as I said in my remarks, we as a Minister of National Defense were open to work with anyone who is interested in defending the human rights. So without, spoiling what is our core business. So the ministry is, what I can say is that we are okay. In the next steps, we'll see what kind of mechanism, because what we need to define is the mechanism how to relate together, not to take information from the non-credible sources. So the credible source, I do not want to say that we cannot, listen what other sources are saying, but it is very, very important to, to get in touch with the credible source in order to see what is good and what is not good on what is being propelled or what is being published. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colonel Omar Saranga, making sure that the ministry is ready to be part of the voluntary principles process, and the emphasis we are giving to this today as the beginning. And as I said in my introduction, the purpose of this webinar today is to lay the foundations. We are here to lay the foundations as the beginning of a series of conversations and actions aimed at, number one, advocating the government of Mozambique to adhere to the voluntary principles and use the voluntary principles as a framework to address the human rights, to reject human rights violation, to repair human rights violation, and to use that as a principle in while responding to repeal the insurgency, and also in dealing with international business community, make sure that, number one, human rights are respected. They are top priority. And importantly, make sure that communities are part of an inclusive governance of how the extractive industry will operate in Mozambique, particularly in northern Cabo Delgado. So I have said we are fortunate. The situation is not good. The situation is dire in the north, but we are fortunate because we are at the beginning. So we can use this framework to quickly repair, to quickly have an inclusive governance. By inclusive governance, I mean the host government, the defense ministry, represented by you, Colonel, the international business community, civil society, and the particularly those who are in the ground, and to start a process of monitoring human rights in Cabo Delgado, monitoring human rights violations, addressing early warning mechanisms and engagements. But more importantly, it is not good that it is perceived that key stakeholders are moving into a militaristic approach to their security. It's not about building walls. It's not about importing most sophisticated tanks. It's about healing. It's about addressing communities. It's about addressing key grievances that have to do with the social fabric and how some of the dynamics came into being. So we are fortunate. We have the Secretariat here of the human rights of the voluntary principles. We have Jonathan DRIMMER here. We are fortunate. We have Anton here. He's an experienced expert on this. So we have the expertise. We have the Secretariat and civil society is here. It's ready. It is already doing something. All we need is to have this as a solid platform, as a solid mechanism to start to address the key grievances that have led us into that situation and way of healing and quickly moving into a new order where people see that their interests are being taken care of, they are respected, the human rights and the IDPs are treated in a way that it is consistent with human dignity, etc. This is the beginning. And again, today, our apologies. Technology, it was not on our side. We had to quickly move from one webinar to the other. But I would like to give, because I have some questions here, I would like to give one more opportunity to Jonathan DRIMMER and address some of the issues and commitment by the Defense Ministry. Jonathan, I know it is early morning in New York, but I know you are sipping some coffee. So please, take the floor.
Thank you. To help protect human rights on the ground, the commitments from the Defense Ministry are so important and so impressive. There is no one single way that human rights can be protected in areas where there are controversies, particularly around business operations. It takes a variety of actions and a variety of commitments. It requires a commitment from companies that are operating in the area. It requires a commitment of engagement with both public and private security forces. It requires a commitment by local communities to assist in engaging with the government, with companies. It requires transparency in how security operations are being conducted. It requires a level of respect and trust that can be gained most effectively through continued commitment and engagement. And it doesn't always start as smoothly as everyone would like, but the most important part is to start. Once you start, it gradually builds. People want to be treated with respect, and they want to engage, and they want to understand how events ultimately are affecting their lives, their children's lives, their ability to get jobs and work and shop safely, go to schools. So these issues are of tremendous importance to people just outside of pure human rights violations. Where there's a threat of a human rights violation, it has an enormous impact on the lives of individuals. So local communities and their representatives, they want to engage, they want to understand, and they want to participate in helping create a dialogue. So the commitment from defense to promoting human rights, protecting human rights, to engaging with the interested stakeholders and actors is just so critically important. And again, from the voluntary principles standpoint, there are a set of principles that have been applied over 20 years and have been shown to be effective time and time again. And so implementing them, following them, working according to the letter of the principles as well as the spirit of the principles is a well-developed, tried and true way to help mitigate human rights violations. The Voluntary Principles Initiative can bring experience in these kinds of settings and these kinds of situations to help illustrate how the principles can most effectively be applied. So with the resources of the initiative, with the principles themselves, and with the commitment that we've heard today, I'm confident that stepping forward and beginning to engage and to apply the principles will have positive impacts upon the people of Mozambique in a very important way. Thank you.
I have one specific question, and that is, what are the checks and balances mechanisms to book companies that go against these principles?
Sure. So it's a great question, and thank you for asking. So a few years ago, this was a major issue within the initiative, as Anton no doubt also remembers. And I want to say it was maybe 2012, 2013. It was almost a breaking point as governments and NGOs were insisting on understanding from an accountability standpoint how it is they could be sure that the companies were really applying the VPs as written and as intended. And a working group was created that really started a process that has continued to grow all the way through today and continues to grow around accountability and verification. And it started with developing key performance indicators, model key performance indicators for companies to be able to show, and they're based on the principles, to be able to show that they are implementing the principles as designed. And so we started with key performance indicators, and then we moved to a verification scheme that currently exists and continues to be perfected within the initiative, where companies have to present on a periodic basis how they are implementing the VPs. So there are annual reports that companies provide, but then they also have to make a presentation. And that presentation is peer reviewed by a government and by an NGO who will ask questions about the implementation process of the company. And so between reporting and the part of the verification framework is that companies do need to issue, again, an annual report that relies on organizationally appropriate key performance indicators, along with the verification schemes to establish that they really are being implemented as designed, and again, with the ability to test that by governments and civil society. You have an approach that does provide confidence that the VPs are being implemented by companies that are part of the initiative. I want to make clear, as I hope I have, that this framework continues to be improved. We continue to look for ways to make it easier for companies they don't have to do things, they don't have to report on things that are less significant, but efforts really are focused on true verification activities. And so there are different ways that can be looked at. But I will tell you, in my own personal view, and it's again a great question, what the single most important way of holding companies to accountable, confirming that they really are implementing. It isn't the presentations, the verification presentations, it isn't the key performance indicator reporting, it isn't the annual reports. The single most effective way, in my view, and part of the reason it's such an important part of the future of the initiative, are the local implementation working groups. People on the ground, local communities, local civil society, local government, local public security, they know if the companies are or aren't implementing the VPs. They know in a way because they see it every day. And so to hear a report by somebody out of a corporate office to us, the Secretariat, is one thing. But to have these engagements, these on-the-ground engagements in the local communities where the companies are operating, that is the true way that we can see whether the companies are or aren't implementing the VPs as they've been written and as they've been intended.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Anton?
Yes, thank you very much. I do not want to keep people for too long on this very illuminating webinar, but I would say is there are first steps. Best is now that the second step is to prepare a small, modest plan, perhaps with Jonathan's support, yourself, Adriano, and of course, Colonel Saranga. And I would say with the convening power of some of the diplomatic presence that you have in the country, particularly countries who are already members of the voluntary principles, who would therefore have access to a lot of history and experience. Key, I would say also to this thinking is not only to think of Cabo Delgado, but to think of all the natural resource industry. You have a thriving mining industry in the country that has huge experience around the world. And I think it is important to not have anyone feeling accused, anyone defensive. You're not making an investigation. You're looking into the future and trying to make the future better such that it delivers the benefits to people. Because it's not about developing gas, it's about making standards of living better for all the population. And that requires a joint effort and courageous moves by Colonel OMAR, by yourself, Professor Novunga, and all the friends that you have. And here we are able to support you in doing that. So thank you for giving us this opportunity to start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Para concluir, Coronel Omar, palavras finais? Coronel Omar?
Alô?
Coronel Omar,
Bom, acho que o muito já foi dito. Foi dito que este é o princípio. Bom, nós, como dissemos no nosso discurso, estamos abertos a trabalhar com todas as organizações entre a defesa dos direitos humanos. O importante é que tenhamos começado. E ao começar temos que continuar, portanto, a trabalhar de uma forma séria. E tratarmos estas questões porque o objetivo é preservar a vida. E nós, como sabem, como militares, há outros que dizem, bom, às vezes os direitos humanos e a guerra não se ligam. Nós conhecemos quais são conhecemos quais são as nossas obrigações, principalmente quando estamos no teatro das operações. Não podem ser confundidas aqui condutas que não estão dentro das regras e dos instrumentos que eu porque, bom, o que tem sido veiculado muitas das vezes tem a tendência de, na minha percepção, inserir as atividades que nós fazemos no teatro da guerra. É verdade que os que estão lá, em princípio, nem olham para essas questões, nem discutem essas questões. Há de notar, quando isto começou, os nossos soldados, os nossos militares, praticamente cortados, estrebuchados, divididos de qualquer maneira. Mas nunca ninguém apareceu ao terreiro a dizer que aquilo ali é contra a vida, é contra o... Mas há indivíduos interessados em fabricar coisas para mostrar que nós é que fazemos. Este país está como está hoje, porque nós, dia e noite, estamos no terreno. Estamos, neste momento, a discutir o que estamos a discutir aqui, porque há camaradas que, neste momento, estão a ser sacrificados. Estão a dar tudo por tudo para que a sua vida, para que os outros possam fazer aquilo que nós, neste momento, estamos a fazer. Então, é importante que olhemos, portanto, para essas questões de forma positiva e motivá-los para que nós continuemos a servir o país que juramos morrer por ele. Por isso, essa iniciativa de estarmos aqui a conversar e discutir, ela é importante porque, em princípio, vai permitir separar o trigo dos bois. Não sei se me fiz compreender. Muito obrigado por terem nos convidado a participar neste webinar. E acredito, como foi bem dito, há de haver mais oportunidades de interagir.
Muitíssimo obrigado.
E assim seja, a luta continua.
Venceremos. Muitíssimo obrigado.
Vitória é certa.
Muitíssimo obrigado, Coronel Saranga. I'd like to thank you, Anton. Thank you, Jonathan, for these very, very, very informative and kind of initial conversations around voluntary principles. As we have indicated, there is a political will from the ministry, the defense ministry. Colonel is here. There is also a huge interest from the International Secretariat, and there is expertise. There is readiness and leadership from civil society. So we would say everything is ready for a new momentum, not only in Cabo Delgado, but in Mozambique, around businesses and human rights, and how that can be done in a way that it preserves the dignity of communities. It helps address those grievances that in the past have led us into where we are today. And we do this not in a judgmental tone, but in a constructive, forward-looking tone, in a more collaborative approach aimed at addressing some of the issues already happening and setting the stage for good governance and respect to human rights and how business is done in this country, particularly in the northern region of Cabo Delgado. From our side, CDD, we are happy to catalyze this process, to host this process, and also some leadership. We will come back, contact some of you with possible way forwards, actionable plan on how we can go about this. Clearly, and constant consultation and participation of the Defense Ministry through Colonel Omar Saranga and the Secretariat of the Voluntary Principles and the international community here in Mozambique. Once again, thank you very much, and looking forward to see you soon. And again, apologies for the technological challenge that we had today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, hoje foi